In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.
Well, hello, Sublation Media viewers and magazine readers and future readers of books. Welcome to the Sublation Magazine Show. This is Sublation Media's weekly live stream in which we speak with authors from the magazine right now and discuss the issues of the day and their relevance to the left. I'm Douglas Lane.
And I'm Ashley Frawley. I'm coming to you from a very echoey room, and I do apologize in advance. It's my first day of my holidays, and I'm away, and I don't have the greatest space, so I hope you'll bear with me.
Well, I enjoy an echo. Before we begin, I want to ask everybody to subscribe, hit the bell. Also, you should make sure you keep to date with Sublation Magazine's latest content by following us on Twitter and Facebook. And if you can, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Links are in the description, or will be. I don't know if I put them in yet. Also, if you feel so inclined, drop us a super chat. Patrons will get access to a second hour of the Sublation Magazine Show, what we call the Parrot Room version. That's for patrons only, where we speak more spontaneously, often make mistakes, argue.
Get drunk.
Yeah, sometimes we get drunk depending on the time of day. For me, it would be a mistake. Right now it's 9 a.m. But right now we have a great show in which we will be talking about mass shootings, the gun rights debate, and the Second Amendment. What will make it great is that we have Ralph Leonard here to talk about his essay, Self-Defense and Socialism, which is now available for free on Sublation Magazine's website. We'll be asking about the deep historic basis of the right to bear arms and what it has meant historically for workers in the workers' struggle and for the civil rights struggle in American history. But let's start by kind of putting this in context. Ashley, let's start talking about the mass shootings.
Yeah, so obviously there's been a string of mass shootings in the United States. In May, there was, some well-publicized mass shootings in a grocery store in Buffalo and at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas. And then, of course, on the 4th of July, there was another horrific shooting, this time at a parade in Highland Park. And each of these crimes was distinct in character. Obviously, one was racially motivated. One seriously called into question the duties of the police, and the third raised questions about the failure of the system to meet the needs and identify people with severe mental health crises. And
I want to jump in here and just ask, that's a controversial in the past, at least the past couple of years, the idea that mass shootings is connected to mental health or that being mentally ill makes you more likely to be a mass shooter is controversial. Mm-hmm. Is there demonstrable proof in this case that was a major factor, or is that generally the case that mental health and mass shootings are connected? I mean, I tend to think that they are, but has that been a controversy on the left?
Well, I don't know about on the left, but just sort of generally in discussions about mass shootings, obviously mental health has come up as what we really need to do is do something about mental health in this country and so on. And actually, thank you for jumping in there, because I was going to I was going to talk about this as something that I thought we should really get into, because you all know what I think about framing things in terms of mental health. From one perspective, it is useful, right? It's an issue that appears insurmountable. It's a very difficult issue. And obviously people are separating from society, from reality. And this is, we use the frame of mental health to understand this, and it's very useful to do so in a lot of ways. On the other hand, it can invite a particular brand of solutions that I think may exacerbate the issue, because mental health is can be a very individualizing discourse. It can say this is a health issue located in the mind of the individual, and therefore deflect our attention from bigger and deeper issues that we have in society, some that Ralph has talked about in his article for Sublation Mag this week, like the enemy, the atomization of contemporary society, the loss of meaning, the fact that it seems that there's a whole or a good portion of a generation of young people that are stuck in a kind of what sociologists and anthropologists call a liminal phase, this kind of betwixt and between. Most cultures have these liminal phases, rites of passage and so on. You're a girl and then you have a rite of passage and you become a woman. And liminality has a clear in and a clear out. You go through a kind of ritual, you go through a period of uncertainty, and at the other side, you come out usually with a higher status. Like adulthood has a higher status in many cultures than childhood. But contemporary Western cultures seem to be struggling with this, where we are, young people, they're not sort of initiated into adulthood in the way that they would have done when they were younger, get married and enter into a higher status of a married adult, become the head of a family, that sort of thing. It doesn't really happen anymore. So you have this period of uncertainty and anomie. And I'm just sort of describing how anthropologists make sense of this.
And even when it does happen, that you like maybe become a head of a family if you're a man, it's been my experience as I've gotten into middle age that the putting aside boyishness is very difficult.
And why would you want to become an adult in our society? We have like the old cult of youth and all of that, but also it's like adults are the cause of all the problems. Children are the future, right? The adult world is the source of everything that's wrong. Parenting is the source of all these problems. You don't enter into a higher status. You're kind of stuck. You're floating. And this we have serious social issues in society. This being one of them. This fact that we don't really offer people, even when you go to university, right? That's another liminal phase. You're supposed to come out with a higher status at the end, but even that's not certain, right?
Yeah.
You don't know what's going to happen. And so we're stuck. We have this sense our societies in general are stuck. And in fact, I love the old diet soap, you still use it now, intro, where, what is it? Is it Rick Wolf?
Rick Roderick.
Rick Roderick. Oh, I'm so
late
stupid.
Rick Roderick. Yeah, that's okay.
So, yes, I know. He's these fantastic old lectures that he used to give.
I want to say something off to the side. When I showed the intro to diet soap to Zizek and Terry Pinkard, Zizek's reaction to Rick Roderick is, "Who is that man? He is completely wrong. He would go to Gulag." Something like that.
Oh, really? Well, no, I just love it because it's exactly it. Like we are stuck in an interregnum between worlds, and that sort of characterizes a lot of our society now. But we can understand it through this liminality. But that calling something a health issue risks medicalizing what is a deeper kind of existential problem we have in contemporary society.
Mm-hmm. It's a difficult situation it's difficult for me to even conceptualize how to address mental health issues that in a way that isn't atomizing or individualistic, because we don't have strategies to develop mental health socially. We don't frame social issues in terms of individual mental health most of the time. I guess that we do to some extent, like you did you did your PhD, I think, in happiness and how that became a political aim. But was like when people would address happiness as a primary concern, and I bring this up because being unhappy seems to me to contribute to being a mass shooter. Not all the time, but it seems to be a component. Were the approaches to developing happiness in the population social, or were they still aiming at individuals?
Oh, no, they would try to be social, but it would be in this really kind of instrumental way where they'd be like, being part of society and doing these things and eating healthy and making sure you don't drink alcohol and volunteering, these things make you happy. They contribute to greater happiness. And what they're missing is that you can't have the source of meaning inside yourself. Most human beings historically didn't live that way. I quote this all the time, but Christopher Lasch said most people didn't live as though they had one life to live. They lived as though they were living their children's lives and their parents' lives. You had a sense of being connected to a kind of piece of string or something, the end of which stretches out into the past, and the other part goes into the future, and you could reach out and you could touch that. Now we don't have that; it's been cut, and so you don't have a sense of being part of something bigger than yourself. And the problem with that instrumentality is that it says all of these things that you do, they are for yourself to make yourself happy, and then any kind of upset becomes difficult to bear because it's an attack on your entire being, your entire existence, and your meaning in life. Whereas, someone like in Man's Search for Meaning, this is Jordan Peterson's favorite psychologist, but it's a good book. He talks about how actually what you need is something beyond yourself, and that's how a lot of people got through, for example, the Holocaust. Was they would think about how they were going to get out of this, what they were going to do after, how they would start new families, this kind of thing. And that it's not that having a meaning beyond yourself makes you happy. It's that it makes suffering bearable because you feel that it's worthwhile. And so you're able to overcome this, but we don't have any sense of our suffering as being worth something because there's no project beyond ourselves. And this is a general this is the sense of normlessness and meaninglessness that we have to deal with in contemporary life. And we're not dealing with very well.
Yeah. In another essay about this topic that I wrote, I always like to talk about my own essays that I also made into a video essay. I talked about I talked about mass shootings in the context of boredom. And so it's not just a matter of not just being disconnected from the kind of communal life that had continuity from one generation to the next, although that's a part of it. It was also disconnected from bourgeois freedom, feeling disconnected from bourgeois freedom as well. So it's not, you don't get the traditional life of continuity and kind of the cycle of the generations to support you, and you also don't get to develop the future in this way that we're being sold that we should be able to. You feel disconnected from the bourgeois project or the modern project of sort of self-development societally. So you don't have any sense that society is headed in a direction that makes sense and that you can participate in. You don't have a role to play. You're put into this sort of position of being a passive spectator at best. And that leads to a sense of boredom, and which is a way of expressing despair. That's all this sort of highfalutin way of saying that the kids are all messed up, and the question is what to do about it. The way that we're handling it in the United States is we're either going to be arming them more, or we're going to be taking their guns away. We haven't quite decided. We're split on this.
We're sure that the problem is definitely the guns, though.
Yeah, they're either not enough or too many guns. We're not sure which one it's going to be. In New York State, there was they had laws on the books to restrict the right of individuals to carry guns in public, but the Supreme Court of the United States basically made those laws unconstitutional, and now people can openly carry guns in New York much more easily. When I was in New York, I met my girlfriend's mother for the first time, and she said to me, "I do not want the Supreme Court to make me carry a gun." And I was like, she said, "Because I can't be trusted with one." Anyway, that's not what the decision said, but it will make it easier. Then there was there are other gun laws that are being passed to make it more difficult, just to obtain a gun. They're making it so you have to be older in order to register for a gun to be a gun owner, which doesn't seem too insane. But overall, we are focused on guns, and one of the things that I think we should think about when it comes to guns is just how they might serve in a revolutionary struggle to solve these problems on a deeper level, rather than just a matter of guns being a consumer item that people can either pick up and own as hobbyists or I guess just as hobbyists or hunters. Guns might be part of a larger struggle for revolutionary change, and that's why we wanted to talk to Ralph Leonard today about that. I think I'll bring him in now, if that's all right with you, Ashley.
Yeah.
All right. So,
hi, Ralph.
Hi, Ralph.
Nice to see you.
Nice. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, thanks for writing for Sublation Magazine. Your article is still up and available for everyone online. It's called Socialism and Self-Defense. I wanted to ask you about that article, and I want to start out by asking you why you are attracted to the revolutionary struggles of the past. What as as a Black British man, what is it about American history in particular that you find compelling as a socialist?
Well, the American Revolution of 1776 was, I mean, depending on how you define it, really the first modern bourgeois revolution, in that it was the first instance of where the modern nation came into being, and, if you will, how we understand, modern democracy, if you will, initially starts in America. And what was, I suppose, very interesting about the American Revolution was it was one of the most successful instances of armed struggle ever, because that's how the Patriots defeated the British, by guns, by force of arms. And clearly, you can't talk about America without this subject of guns being brought up, and the Second Amendment is always up for contestation, not just in America, obviously, but even amongst around the world when non-Americans comment on this topic. And it's very, what I find quite weird and fascinating about this debate on the Second Amendment is how it's very much restricted on to, is it an individual right or not? Like, so liberals will say it's not, because the idea of a common civilian having a gun is just simply madness to them. And while conservatives will defend it because they believe, the individual has a right to defend himself, his property, his community from bad people. But if you actually look at the Second Amendment in its whole, which both sides of this gun debate actually don't, because they don't really understand it, because the way it's constructed is, to the layman, seems quite grammatically cryptic. There's the well-regulated militia for the necessary security of the free state, and then it says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Like, this, someone who doesn't really know the history behind it, it can seem quite confusing, because how does one relate to the other? And it's only when you look at the history that it does really make more sense, because the right to keep and bear arms, like many other modern rights that we think of, like free speech or free press, comes out of the bourgeois revolution, and, in other words, the struggle of the third estate against monarchy, absolutism, and feudalism. And it was very much expressed through, revolutionary republicanism was how, the right to bear arms was often expressed, because it starts with, Machiavelli in Florence, where he made up the militia of the Florentine Republic as an alternative to the idea of a standing army who is loyal to a monarch, because often a lot of Republican theorists look back on the Roman Republic, and they sort of conceived of their militia as the symbol of liberty, the idea of a militia composed of armed citizens of the people, of the polity itself, as a symbol of liberty. And then that was degraded by Caesar imposing standing armies that was loyal to him, that could oppress the people. So then that's where sort of this idea came up, and then it really became expressed during the English revolutionary period, between the conflict between the Republicans and the radical Whigs against the Stuart monarchy. Because a lot of people actually don't know this, but the precursor to the Second Amendment is from England. It's from the English Bill of Rights of 1689, which says that which actually restored the right of Protestant subjects to keep and bear arms, because of the Catholic Stuart monarchy tried to disarm them through various sort of game acts, to disarm them so that the monarchy could claim that they had the monopoly on armed force. And then obviously that idea became, transported into colonial America, and then expressed itself in the American Revolution, where they felt that a standing army linked with a monarchy was linked with oppression, tyranny, and dynastic warfare, while a national militia composed of armed citizens was linked with freedom and popular sovereignty against the state.
Mhm.
So that, very briefly, is like a précis of the history of the right to bear arms within, classical bourgeois revolutionary history.
Yeah, and one thing that you write in the article is that people who tend to be suspicious of gun rights will demonstrate a kind of very strong faith in the state. And I find that interesting even among leftists, because I've noticed on Twitter that a lot of young leftists will read Lenin's State and Revolution and not much else. And yet they seem to forget the kind of basic argument in that, which is that the purpose of the state is to enforce the oppression of one class by another. And he says, if you want proof of that, go ahead, arm yourselves, and you'll wind up fighting against the state. I wondered if you could kind of speak to that a little bit. Where do you think that comes from? Why do you think it seems to be so against the grain on the left, even though the way that you've kind of talked about it in the article, it's a central tenet of socialism. Why do you think we've gone so far away from that?
I think it's to do with how the historical development of socialism and the left more broadly, whereas at least socialism, as I understand it, traditionally was, seeking to get rid of the state or abolish the state or transcend the state so that society could govern itself. Whereas, there's been a development within socialism and the left, partially to do with Stalinism and other factors, and that sees the state as the tool of social reform. The way you can reform society is through the power of the state. So, and then naturally, you would sort of believe that the state should have that monopoly, and utter and indisputable monopoly on armed force. So the idea of armed citizenry just doesn't make sense to you. Like it would be an affront to this idea. So that's, and a lot of liberals actually believe this as well, which is in contradiction with classical liberalism, which is, as I said before, believed in this armed citizenry idea.
In the United States, there's also this development of progressivism, which I think kind of replaced socialism as the primary way that the left thinks about difficulties and problems in society. So rather than wondering about how we can free the population to overcome problems, we think about how we can regulate the population to integrate into society more effectively. We have to make sure that the sodas aren't too big. In order to make sure that people in New York or wherever aren't consuming too much soda, or the whole education system was changed into how to train people.
It's a paternalistic idea of the state, that the state should be the ones to protect you, or keep you, be concerned with your welfare, in other words, and your safety, and that's where ultimately gun control comes from.
I mean, I wouldn't want my kids running around with guns. They'll kill themselves. They'll shoot their eye out. Can't have that.
Well, that's why you have to, as I learned, I have to say that I actually was on the fence about this, and I found your article to be quite convincing. But that's an argument for gun safety and learning about how to properly use a weapon, not to ban them. But what I was going to say is that this, I think this also goes hand in hand with a shift away from freedom towards safety that is linked intimately to the loss of the belief in the human subject. Because this is at the heart of liberalism, right? You believe in these freedoms because you believe that the human being is rational and capable of dealing with freedom, that you can think about your emotions and make a judgment on how to act, that you can make a choice in a democratic society, that there's something about all human beings that unites us, and that is our capacity for reason, and this is the basis for rights. This is all gone now. And so it becomes very difficult then in this context to make an argument for freedom, because the subject is no longer the solution. The subject is the problem. People are the problem. Our stupidity, our inability to self-regulate, all of these things are problems that the benevolent state can do something about.
And in a way, gun ownership is the perfect test for that. It's precisely because a gun does have that inherent power and danger that certainly that demands respect. And that, do you trust, if you will, the common citizen to have that right, or do you not? And that's really, in a nutshell, that's what this ultimately comes down to. Because, you know, a lot of gun control proponents aren't really anti-gun per se. It's a disagreement as to who should get them. Should the armed bodies of the state have them, a monopoly on them, and approved private security, or should the body of the people have access to them to be able to exercise their right to self-defense, either individually or collectively? Because go on.
Well, I was going to say, I think that someone coming to this debate from the outside, this is not, obviously, this is very far from my area of expertise. The only thing that I noticed was the constant talking about mental health that made me kind of go, you're individualizing a problem that's a cause of individualization. You're just going to make it worse. But someone from the outside would say, no, the crux of the issue isn't all this highfalutin talk about subjectivity. The crux of the issue is that people are dying, right? So this is a highly emotive kind of topic. And I wondered, just from the outside, it just seems so obvious. There was a mass shooting in the UK, what was it, 40, 50 years ago? And they immediately changed the gun laws and the problem was solved. And this is a problem that is urgent, and it's now. How do you respond to that? Can we really take this on a higher plane when we have school shootings?
Okay, now this is where you have to, why is it happening? Because for me, the debate on the guns kind of misses the point as to why these mass shootings are happening, because America has always had guns. America's always had permissive gun laws relative to other countries. Like even as late as the 1960s, you could order a gun, even I think a fully automatic machine gun from a catalog, and have it delivered to you without any background checks. And the only reason that stopped was because of Lee Harvey Oswald. But there weren't mass shootings like frequently back then. Mass shootings have only become more frequent in the past 30 years since Columbine, and that's to me the more interesting question. Why is it happening now more than, say, in the past?
As an old guy, I want to say, hey, it's not Columbine. Wasn't the beginning. There were.
I know, but it's become more like frequent.
I just remember that there was a UT, the University of Texas. There was a mass shooting in the bell tower. There was a song, I don't like Mondays.
Yeah.
This girl in the UK shoots up the elementary school. It has happened. It actually, I think, goes back to the 19th century. There are mass shootings as far back as then, but it certainly has picked up speed.
But it was rarer then than it is now.
But it's interesting to put this kind of into context as well, which, sorry, maybe I'm jumping in. I should let you do this, but I found it very difficult to find data on per capita, because you have to understand per capita statistics. And that for me, as a sociologist one of the things that I do is I look out for stats, and bad stats are everywhere. And this is one of these areas where bad stats just proliferate. There's a one that's like, the number of children who've died in gun violence has doubled every year since 1950. Anyone good at math can understand that if that was the case, there would be more children dying from gun violence than there are stars in the universe. But
right.
one of the one thing that people don't understand is that the United States is an enormous country with a humongous population. So even very, very rare events will happen, and will happen with some frequency, even though they are as a whole very rare. And it seems to me, when I finally did find the per capita numbers, there aren't that many more than on the whole, victims of gun violence than there were in the 1970s, which I found a bit shocking. And it took me a long time to dig up that stat. Was that something that you came across when you were writing the article, that actually there's something going on where people are playing fast and loose with the stats?
Yeah, because one problem with this debate is, how do you define a mass shooting? Because it depends on where you look. Because I think a lot of definitions have this very broad, that if 4 or more people are wounded, at least wounded, then that's a mass shooting. So then you have like a lot of gang shootings that happen. Like for example, in Sacramento, California, there was a gang shootout that was called the largest mass shooting in Sacramento's history. Yet gang shootout is not what most people think of when you hear the phrase mass shooting. When you hear the phrase mass shooting, you usually think of, what happened in Uvalde or Sandy Hook or Columbine or in Las Vegas in 2017, like these sort of indiscriminate shootings in public places by a lone individual, usually a young man. And that's why I saw a stat from the Washington Post that said, like, so far in 2022 there have been 303 mass shootings, and I just knew that that's like a little bit propagandistic, because it's sort of implying that there have been 303 Uvalde type shootings in America, when that's just not true. And the problem is that if you really want to comprehend the problem of gun violence in American society, then you have to recognize the diversity of it. Like, there are different types of violence used by guns, each with their own unique causes and circumstances that you have to take into account, and each of them requiring different solutions. So how you would solve gang violence in inner cities will be different from how you deal with the Uvalde type mass shootings, and that will be different from, say, another subset of mass shootings, which is like when, say, the father sort of kills his own whole family. So like, that's I think much of the gun debate in America doesn't take into account this nuance of it.
Ralph, a few minutes ago, I interrupted you when you were saying, "Oh, this goes back to Columbine and it's been picking up since then," and you were on your way to describing why these mass shootings happen, why you think that this is happening, and I kept you off and stopped you from getting to that point. So, why are these mass shootings happening?
I think it's because of a intensification of various processes, such as atomization of society, intensification of anomie, the sort of breakdown of society institutions in which individuals become socialized. Because what I think we have now is that you do see a kind of, at least a portion of this current generation, usually young men, who are completely isolated, who are don't have any sort of socialization, who can't participate in society in any meaningful way, and then they become very sort of vulnerable into entering into this sort of nihilistic subcultures and discourses to find, their own kind of sense of self through it. And it's not just sort of American mass shooters that do this. You see it with, jihadists and far right terrorists. There's a sort of a kinship, if you will, with what Dostoevsky described as the possessed in the 19th century. And I think there is some similarities with them because of the sort of use of individualistic violence in this very nihilistic way, sort of violence for its own sake, not to achieve a sort of concrete goal. It's just killing for killing's sake, like the idea of a sort of pure revolt against society itself.
Mm-hmm. Ashley, do you have a follow-up or?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder too, like whenever you think about an issue that, obviously something comes up in the news, you think, oh, why did this bad thing happen? And I think you've given a fairly similar explanation to what I gave at the beginning. I think you're right. I think that there's this deep kind of atomization that explains these fairly rare events, but also all sorts of things that we wouldn't think about as being connected to that, much less serious things, things like incels. There's a general kind of problem of alienation in society that is a separation of a certain portion of the population from society and a sense of breakdown and a loss of meaning. But I think also we need to think about why we worry so much about these events, right? Because if it is quite rare. As a proportion of gun violence, I mean, most people would be surprised to learn that most gun violence is suicide, which again speaks to a kind of, while you're going to be Durkheimian about it, this normlessness, a sense of lack of belonging to society. But I wondered if you could speak to, like, why do we worry about it if it is comparatively rare?
Because of its seemingly random and inexplicable nature. Because at least, with most terrorist attacks, you at least know why they're doing it. Like there's at least a sort of concrete reason why terrorists, engage in what they do. Whereas with at least a big proportion of like mass shootings in America, there isn't really a very clear motive as to why they do it. So, for example, the most deadliest mass shooting in American history was in Las Vegas in 2017, where Stephen Paddock, a 60-something-year-old white guy with a pilot's license, with a very respectable job, shot at a crowd in a music festival with an AR-15 32 floors up for no reason at all. Seemingly, like they've never been able to come up with a clear reason as to why he did it, other than because he could. And it's that kind of thing that really sort of worries people. The idea of someone going to a public place, where we, carry out our mundane activities like a grocery store or a music festival or, a school, and somebody just comes in with a gun and shoots up the place for seemingly no reason, and you can't understand why. And that's why a lot of people, very understandably worry about it.
Yeah.
This is the thing about random violence. There's a very good book by Joel Best, published in 1999, called Random Violence. And it talks about why we tend to worry so much about random attacks, when actually most violence is patterned, most crime is patterned. It tends to be, inner cities. If you are going to get shot, you kind of know you're at risk of being shot. That's kind of the way that it works. And yet we worry so much about these things. We worry about random sexual attacks, these sorts of things, even though they are really, really rare. But I wondered also too, like when I was going through some of the, I was reading around this issue, I noticed that a lot of the articles that were kind of questioning this narrative would bring up, well, most shootings, most murders are in gangs and they're in inner cities. Like, we can breathe a sigh of relief. It's just Black people killing each other. Don't worry, everybody. But actually, and it was like this sense like, Well, maybe we fear also these random attacks because we fear this violence leaking out of its safe homeland, which is far away. And then you have like sort of nice suburban middle class people suddenly being confronted with the reality of guns. And I wonder, do we risk falling into the trap of saying, oh, well, it's actually not a big deal because it's mostly, as I said, Black people killing each other in inner cities and poor people and so on.
I would say that a lot also some of the gang shooters are also motorcycle gangs in the South, which is mainly white. You know, for those who've watched Sons of Anarchy will know what I mean.
Very good point.
But yeah, I think why this has become a very emotional issue is, yeah, it is partly to do with the fact that a lot of these random mass shootings are happening more and more in sort of affluent suburban like areas. Like, for example, the Highland Park shooting was in a mainly middle class suburban area, which, you know, traditionally within American sort of discourse, you know, the suburb is where, you know, things are safe, quaint, calm, and it's the inner cities that's the really chaotic, violent. That's the part where you stay away from. And now, yeah, I suppose, yeah, for many sort of middle class people who do get involved in the gun control debate because it feels very real fear to them that this random violence will come to them and will affect them. So yeah, I think there is a point to that.
Let's return to this.
Wait, can I just defend myself? Somebody in the comments says sexual attacks are rare. The stat I've heard is 1 out of 4 women has been sexually assaulted. Yeah, exactly. And I bet you're picturing random people attacking somebody in an alley. No, like random attacks are rare. It's people who know each other. That's where sex attacks come from. Random.
Yeah, you specifically said random sexual.
Sorry, I felt the need to defend myself.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, okay, well, I want to go back to the, but it's worth underlining that, you know, you gotta don't go after Ashley on things she hasn't said. I want to go back to the revolution. I want to get back to a revolutionary political struggle. That's my whole
because
goal
that's
now.
what's at stake.
Yeah, I think it is what's at stake, and even though it makes me uncomfortable, it's what my politics are aimed at. But I wonder if when people argue for the right to bear arms in the context of modern warfare, if there is something antiquated about that argument. Noam Chomsky will frequently make this point. It's like to argue for the right to bear arms in an era where there are tanks and drones and even nuclear weapons is a complete absurdity. And there's no chance at all that an armed public would be able to topple the United States and its military. So how would you respond to that objection? That really the other reason why this right to bear arms and the freedom associated with an armed public is no longer something important to the socialist movement is because of the changing technological power of the state.
And then because of it, Chomsky will say you should vote for the Democrats. Well, okay. In all seriousness, sure, like the state has, you know, at least in America, the state has the biggest standing army of all time, and of course, it's a very technologically sophisticated. But my issue with that argument is that it does portray the state as omnipotent, like as if it's like a god, that, you know, and that asymmetric, like if we really want to get down into the weeds on this, that asymmetric warfare will always lead to the victories of the dominant state, when that's not always the case. You know, the United States have lost wars, or at least not won them, against adversaries that are less powerful than them. So, you know, with warfare, just like with any human interaction, there's no formula that guarantees victory or defeat, and that goes for so to speak, our case, that there's no guns are not a guarantee that you will win anything. They're not a, so to speak, forgive the pun, a magic bullet.
Yeah. Mm.
But in certain circumstances, in very specific circumstances, they can be useful and even be decisive. And that's really my point of this article, that like guns are not can serve a tool, that they are a tool. They can be used for progressive revolutionary means. And if we are it's not, and obviously it's not meant to, I don't want this to be some stupid call for Blanquist adventurism where, you know, we're just gonna march onto the White House with our AR-15s and try and seize the state from there.
When are we going to start doing that again? I want to write that down. Oh, no, you don't want to do that.
Now the channel is demonetized. What have you done?
Just kidding.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, Ralph.
Yeah, it's just, but like if there is going to be a socialist revolutionary struggle to transcend the state and capital, and this is going to have worldwide, it's going to be a worldwide revolution, as it's going to have to be, then I don't think it really makes sense that armed force has no part to play, or it will never be used in that context. I don't think so, because what I find very mind-numbing about gun control is that its implication that guns are so bad that the state and criminals should have a duopoly on them, whereas if you will, the common citizen, the people most vulnerable to both forms of violence, shouldn't have one iota of it because they can't be trusted with it.
Right.
And
that is a long-standing argument from the NRA. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying I've heard it before.
Well, there was a shooting a few days ago, was there not, where an armed member of the public ended it after 15 seconds, and that's been their big art. Now they're jumping on that.
Yeah, that's true.
So actually, speaking of the NRA, one question that I saw floating around on social media was, wow, a whole article on the Second Amendment that never mentions the NRA once. What do you think? What do you think about the NRA? And I guess sort of the broader argument that it's not us good people arming, but the wrong sorts of people.
What do I think the NRA? Well, they are a conservative, like, advocacy organization. I don't really agree with their politics. It's like, I mean, I don't know what really to say about them, because they are a right-wing front group, and you know, obviously their whole concept, their defense of the right to bear arms is often linked with, you know, sort of cultural Calvinism, and you know, the right of, you know, the law-abiding individual to, you know, defend himself and his property. And they do say some really bombastic stuff, and even I would say they're even inconsistent about their defense of gun rights, because there have been, you know, some instances in which, you know, gun owners have had their Second Amendment rights violated. For example, you know, Philando Castillo in America, black guy who was shot by the police, who gave him his concealed carry license and then got shot with it, and the NRA was very mute about that. And even another one, like a few months ago, with the black guy who carried a gun, who bought a gun to defend himself because there was a break-ins in his area, and then the police had their no-knock warrants, but they went to the wrong house, and then this guy, thinking that someone was, trespassing, picked up his gun, and then the police saw it, and then they shot him. And then the NRA on that has been very mute on it. So I would say that if you're really interested in gun rights, then the NRA isn't really the organization you think it is.
So I wonder if we should have our own kind of socialist communist gun rights movement that protects the real right to bear arms.
I want to throw some comments from viewers on the screen here and maybe respond to them, or have Ralph do it. The thing is, though, gun control works. The data here is very clear, they say. Is that true, Ralph? Like in the UK and in Europe, where there is stricter gun laws and there, an outright ban on handguns and rifles and things, is there less violence overall, less murder?
Well, yes, but I would, because it's funny how because there's always the caveat that within industrialized nations, that's usually the caveat. So yeah, in England and much of Western Europe, they have gun control laws more stricter than America, and yeah, there's less gun violence. But then you have other countries like my own Nigeria, which has very, very strict gun laws on paper, yet is a violent country. So gun control on its own is not the magic bullet against violence. There's other social reasons why violence occurs, and that's where the debate should be on.
Someone says we can 3D print guns with a $135 printer now. The argument is over, I think. Your state isn't going to protect you from guns. It can't. I suppose they could protect us from 3D printers by regulating the internet. So
they might do if they can mobilize the harm principle enough, and we'll all get on board because we just love us some harm. Manufacture some harms, and we'll be like, yes, take our freedom. We don't want it. Screw that.
So another commenter says, I can't bring myself to give a crap about gun control when I can't pay my bills and I can't afford to get this lump on my arm checked, and I have no agency at all in my daily work life.
What do you think about that, Ralph? That this debate is just too far removed from normal people's concerns.
No, it isn't. Because, well, in America, most gun owners are ordinary people. So whatever gun laws are going to be debated is going to affect them. And I don't think that they should be the ones who are disarmed, and the state and criminals get to have the guns. I just don't believe in that.
So actually, that just related to that, Doug, before you pull up another question, is what do you think about the argument? I guess Doug and I were talking before we started before we went live, and I said, look, I know all the arguments, I've heard them a million times, but that's socialist revolution. That's so not on the cards. Let's be realistic here. I'm just picturing what someone like my husband would say, who's just a total normal person going about his life, horrified at watching the news. Socialist revolution, that's never going to happen. What will happen is somebody's going to shoot up a school. I mean, surely in the face of that, and just kind of linking with this is what normal people are concerned about. I mean, are we, how do we get beyond that if that's something that's important? Because ultimately, it's people like him that vote and decide, maybe we shouldn't have these kinds of laws. Or rights.
That's for Ralph. That's for you, Ralph.
Okay. Well, I'll just say again that you have to tackle the causes of violence, and I think guns on their own aren't sufficient one way or another to either cause or reduce violence. By the way, with all crime or all violence, there is many sort of social causes behind them, whether it's like the alienation and atomization we talked about, or even just poverty, like, or even like the war on drugs in America. Things like that, I think, would at least severely mitigate much of gun violence that happens in America. So, but I do understand the the argument that's put there, because what's so convincing about what makes gun control so convincing on its face is that it disguises itself as a simple solution to what are very complicated and multifaceted problems. So,
I'm going to throw one more question up on the screen, and then I think we'll wrap it up for today. Thank you, Ralph, for being part of this conversation and for writing your essay for Sublation Magazine. People should find that link to it in the show notes after we're done here. I'll put that in there and make sure it's there. Someone asked, should I be able to buy as much nitrogen fertilizer as I want? Another way this is sometimes expressed, back in the 90s when I was an anarchist, I would read all sorts of crazy propaganda from the anarchists, and one of them was like, every man should have his own nuclear weapon. So what do you think about that argument? Like, if we're going to make sure that the public is armed against the state, we should go ahead and go all the way, let them have tanks and
yeah, why are we only armed to the extent we can hurt each other, not the state?
Well, okay, here's the difference. A nitrogen fertilizer or a rocket or an RPG is inherently an indiscriminate weapon of mass destruction. Like, whereas a gun, you can discriminate between who you want to shoot or you can't shoot. Whereas with a RPG, it's less difficult to discriminate between the target and any bystanders that may be there.
So maybe the state shouldn't have those weapons either.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because, well, ultimately, as socialists, it's about getting rid of the state, isn't it not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
And abolishing their standing armies.
Yeah, and getting rid of the commodity form. I have to, and value, and I have to do my. All right, okay. Listen, thank you, Ralph, for coming by. I say something I think is absolutely true, but I'm embarrassed to say it. All right, and you should come back. You should write for us some more. I always enjoy talking to you, Ralph. So,
and also, we have a parrot room, do we not?
Yeah, well, that's right. You should stick around. Thank you.
Ralph, would you mind sticking around and chatting with us a little bit more? Because I want to know, who are you? Okay. Why do I agree with you so much? Because I don't know you in real life. And usually the people that I agree with, I know you and you know me. And we know why. But I don't know who you are.
I don't know if you have this, but a social security number or the equivalent. We want your credit card number. Who are you? No, we'll talk about your politics and more broadly what you believe in the parrot room. Okay. All right. Bye. Thanks a lot for sticking around.
Thank you.
Okay. So, Ashley, we did it again. We managed to talk for almost an hour.
About something we know nothing about. No, I'm kidding.
I know what a gun is. I've seen a gun. So, I want to remind everyone, if you enjoy Sublation Magazine, go ahead and like this, comment on the video, think about it really hard, tell your friends about it, dream about it, and put something on Instagram that cryptically mentions it. Anything you can do to subtly get us into the discourse. Also, support us on Patreon. We could use the money. And if you do sign up for $8 a month, you'll be able to watch the Parrot Room discussions, including the one that will be coming up with Ralph Leonard. And since he agreed to do this so nicely, in about, I'm going to say 20 minutes, around 10:20, we'll start the next stream, if that's not too late for you, Ralph. I'm going to actually ask you, Ralph, are you going to be available at 10:20? Will that be all right? In 10, 20 minutes? All right, great. All right.
Perfect.
So we'll do that. Yep. And here we are with the outro, and thank you, everybody.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, People living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.